Welcome to Reimagining Theological Education Together, where we talk about theological education from all sectors and from around the world and consider how to reimagine it so that it can further strengthen God's people, the church, for gospel mission. In other videos, you've heard me say that the West to the rest era of missions is over. We have moved into an era where missiologists and others are beginning to recognize that though there are still missions to take place out of the West, it is no longer the center for all missions. And it's an incredible concept and idea to recognize that the West to the rest era is not so much what we have now in 2025 and in the years to come. In fact, if you speak to Africans, I've heard them say to me, and some of you may have heard the same thing, Africa is no longer a mission field, but a mission force. And I've interacted with mission societies in Africa. Again, here in the West and United States and North America, we have different groups that are evangelical mission societies and so on and so forth. They have the same thing in Africa as a continent. And I've been on Zoom calls with dozens of agencies and churches that are heavily involved in missions out of Africa. I've known of Latin Americans who are serving as missionaries in Afghanistan or in Europe. When I was leading DTS en Español at Dallas Theological Seminary, we had students from Latin America that were serving as missionaries in China. And of course, the whole Asian diaspora that has been taking place for a long time continues to expand around the world. Folks, it is a different time. Globalization has had a lot to do with this as well, and it also technology and information. And it's just a number of different factors. But the point is that we are in a polycentric era of missions. And in a sense, this is an exciting time for those that are involved in missions and missiologists, people that study trends and practices in missions today. It's an incredibly exciting time. But what does this have to do with theological education? And here's what I say. Let's begin to reimagine polycentric theological education. And here's the statement that I have. Theological education is increasingly becoming more polycentric through centers of reflection and practice outside of the West. Let me repeat that. Theological education is increasingly becoming more polycentric through centers of reflection and practice outside of the West. So just as missions has moved towards other multiple centers around the world, especially around the global South, majority world settings, we see the same thing happening in theological education. And those of us that are involved in training programs, whether they be formal or non-formal, it doesn't matter. We need to be alert and in tune with what's happening globally and where movements are taking place for theological education. Some of this is because of what's happened in these parts of the world that want to almost move towards an anti-colonial type of understanding of theological education. There's a lot of that happening in missions and other areas of missiology, but certainly in theological education, we see that as well. We see training programs and institutions that are wanting to move from a colonized era where it was that many programs were exported from the West and dropped into various contexts all over Africa, all over Asia, all over Latin America. And so you see programs even still today in these parts of the world that look exactly like a program that you would see here in North America. But there's a movement towards moving away from that. And that has helped to fuel this movement of polycentric theological education. There's also something that happened recently with COVID. It seems like it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, but it was not that long ago that COVID was causing a major global disruption in many different ways, but especially in missions and in theological education. And as I've interacted with those in Africa, especially some in Asia, what they tell me is that COVID, in a sense, proved to be a good thing for them in that they were able to accelerate their work on their own faster. All of a sudden, because of COVID, funding and also personnel, teachers, professors, counselors, others that would normally go to these parts of the world and help them with their programs, all of a sudden that was all cut off. And with that being cut off, the leaders of these programs in these parts of the world had to rely on other new, innovative ways of handling their circumstances at the moment in time. And that has only accelerated their independence from the West, further encouraging more centers of theological education. There's also a good number of global ministries. I think about Langham, I think about Scholar Leaders, several others. These are significant ministries that are involved in theological education across the world, besides ICETE. And they're actually partners of ICETE. They work very closely with ICETE, so I know them very well. But there's a significant investment being made in Asia, Africa, Latin America, in scholarship, in more critical reflection, in more context-rooted curricular design, and more development that is for those settings, by those settings, and the leaders in those settings. And there's a tremendous support for that. So all of this is moving us towards what I said a moment ago. Theological education is increasingly, I'm not saying we are there, but it is increasingly becoming more and more polycentric. We have multiple centers now of reflection and practice that are outside of the West. And I see that only to increase for the reasons I just mentioned a moment ago. Let me give you just some examples. I was at a seminary in Spain, and the gentleman is showing me through the seminary, the leader of the seminary is showing me around. We walk into this one room, and it is full of Chinese speakers, leaders that are there being trained, and the program is all in Chinese. I've been to a school in Liberia, where as I was there, the leader, the principal of the school was showing me around. As he's showing me around, I asked him, what is your strongest program right now at this school at the graduate level? And without any hesitation, he said, by far, our strongest program right now is our missions training program and department. If you know anything that's happening in North America, there's a lot of challenges with missions departments at schools and seminaries. But here in Liberia, they are preparing leaders to be missionaries all over the world. There are schools in India that have training programs, extensions in Africa. We have non-formal training programs out of Cuba that are also now doing non-formal training programs in Africa. We have ATA, Asia Theological Association, and ACTI, the African Regional Association for ICETE. These two have grown tremendously over the last few years. That's because of all the scholarship and all the work that's being developed in those regions for theological education. Those of you that are in North America, ATS, Association of Theological Schools, they have a whole section on global engagement, and they're very involved with ICETE and trying to become more aware, more in tune with what's happening outside of the West. So all of these things are playing into this more polycentric, increasingly polycentric theological education that is being developed outside of the West. The ICETE Manifesto also says this. It says, while theology is meant to be relevant in local contexts, it will also be an expression of the one global church. This requires conversation and interaction between local context, denominational boundaries, and the horizon of single congregations. In an increasingly globalized and polycentric world, partnerships in theological education will become more and more significant and important over time. See, the manifesto is also capturing what I'm talking about here during this video. It's talking about theological education being in conversations with the global church. So I know that as I've interacted with leaders and leading ICETE and my role at Dallas Seminary as well, we have become very intentional of being involved with the World Evangelical Alliance, the WEA, with Lausanne. These are two significant global ministries that are involved with church and missions and what's happening in churches all over the world and in missions all over the world. And so for us within theological education, we want to know what's happening in the global church and in every area of the world. So as we do so, the WEA in Lausanne helps us do this. We're also involved with GACX, the Global Alliance for Church Multiplication. It's a church planting network. We know that there are churches being planted all over the world. But as they're planted all over the world, what is the role of theological education to come along and strengthen those church plants? Missio Nexus is a global network of missions agencies and ministries. We're also engaging with them as well. I say all this because, as the manifesto says, we need to be in conversations and interaction with what's happening in the church all over the world. But the manifesto also talks about being in a polycentric world today. So the manifesto itself is acknowledging that we have moved towards the West to the Rest era, towards a more polycentric, multiple centers for missions and theological education today. It talks about partnerships, having partnerships in theological education that will become more and more important in this globalized and polycentric world. The core value of polycentric missiology is collaboration, because we know that not one organization can address every issue sufficiently and in a timely manner. We must be working together more. Let me give an example of some of this too. There's a movement towards regional or countrywide training hubs. I know of a group right now that just worked on a training hub in Mozambique in Africa. And what is a training hub? Well, this is where within a section, within a particular part, defined region or country or whatever the case may be, within a defined section, we have formal, we have non-formal, we have church, we have missions, we have others that are involved in culture and society that are helping to develop these regional training hubs that are context rooted, but they're also based for their section, their area, their part of the world. This is another example of polycentric development, where there are now these even smaller centers of reflection and practice in theological education. We have formal and non-formal theological education, those two major sectors working more and more together, along with the informal as well. Yeah, formal, non-formal, informal, all wondering how is it that we can work together more. We see that happening. There are mapping initiatives that are happening around the world where we're trying to identify who's doing what where are we duplicating efforts, where are the gaps that still remain. All of this is helping us to be more in tune with what's happening in theological education outside the West. And how is it that the Lord, during this era, during this period of time, is developing reflection and practice that is not always centered in the West? Like missions, we see a movement towards multiple centers in theological education. It may be slow. It may not be happening at the rate we all might wish it to happen, but it is happening. Still, finances are too much centered on the West, but even there, friends, I am encouraged by what I see in some of the innovative ways that seminaries are thinking about financing their programs and being less and less dependent on the West. There's new scholarship, new programs. There's new contextually rooted programs addressing contextual issues within context. There's growth and strength in many of the regional associations of ICETE, especially in Africa and in Asia. You've heard me in other videos talk about the rapid growth of the Global South and the churches in those areas. Well, theological education in those areas, in all of its forms, is moving fast as well, trying to keep up with that church growth. And in my view, as I see what's happening, I would not be surprised that over the next 5 to 7 years, there will be more centers of theological education, reflection, and practice outside of the West than we have in the West. My encouragement to you, those of you that are curious about or wondering about theological education, perhaps you're involved in theological education at some level, whether it be formal, non-formal, or informal, is to remain curious. Keep looking, keep watching, be informed about what's happening. Try to engage those that are involved with theological education in other parts of the world. Some of this you can do through the ICETE newsletter. There's a website there that you can subscribe to news. That's one way of doing so, but there's so many other ways for you to stay informed and engaged about what's happening. There's a missions principle that we've all learned over time. You learn a lot about your own culture when you begin to learn about someone else's culture. And the same is true for theological education, friends. As you begin to interact, engage, remain curious about, interact with those that are involved in theological education in other parts of the world. I'm not only speaking about how those within the Western part of theological education can learn from those within the global South, but also goes the other way too. We could continue to learn mutually, because as we engage each other about theological education, we learn not only about each other's programs, but we learn about ourselves as well. It's a new polycentric era for theological education, and we need to continue to be looking at that if we're going to be able to fully enjoy what the Lord is doing around the world to build up the body of Christ worldwide, and using theological education in all these different parts of the world to strengthen the church for its mission. I fully believe that part of reimagining theological education together includes global interaction, awareness, learning about others and ourselves, and discovering distinct opportunities to work together. And that, to me, is what could be the most exciting part about this movement towards multiple key centers of reflection and practice in theological education, being able to discover new opportunities mutually to work together for the sake of the church and its mission. If you've enjoyed this video and you're enjoying others that you see on this YouTube channel, please subscribe by clicking the button down there below. And please continue to join us as we look to reimagine theological education together.